o'clock. I start at 12, so we're starting at 12. So let me give you a little bit of a disclosure. When Vicky had called and said, "Hey, let's do I need some ideas for some classes," and one of the ideas I gave her for October was the life of an escrow. To be honest with you, I wasn't anticipating that I was going to do the life of the escrow class. I thought we were going to do have an escrow officer or somebody like that come in and do the life of the escrow. So this class might be a little bit different. Thank you, buddy. Might be a little bit different than what you anticipated because we are going to do the life of an escrow, but we're not going to do the life of the escrow from the perspective of an escrow officer. We're going to do the life of the escrow from what I think is the perspective of the agent, and what I believe you guys should be doing to make sure that the life of your escrow flows in a fashion that is successful and smooth and all the rest of that. So we will jump into probably what some of you may have been expecting on this call, which is more escrow type checklist stuff. But those are the type of things that I think you would normally be getting from your escrow officer. And since we didn't set it up that way, like it's going to be just a little bit of a different perspective. So hopefully, when we get to the end of this, you'll say, "Oh wow, that wasn't what I expected, but that was actually a pretty cool take." Or if you're ultimately disappointed after the first 10 or 15 minutes of this, then you can check out of this class and then you can have a real escrow officer. So I guess for me, I'll be able to determine whether my attendance starts to go down or whether we hold steady through the class. So, hey, Vic, you just jumped in. I was just sharing with the group when we talked about doing the life of the escrow class. I didn't think that I was going to be the one doing the life of the escrow class. I thought we'd have an escrow officer do it. So I'm still gonna do it. Hopefully you guys will stick with me for the hour and you'll say, wow, that was good, different than what I expected, but the content was still good. So we're just going to take a different angle. So the angle that I want to approach this from, I've pulled up my CAR win forms or zip forms, or are we now calling it the lone wolf forms? I noticed that lone wolf has acquired um, the zip forms, or at least their fingerprints are now all over it.
Yep,
So
they did.
that's very interesting. Um, by the way, just real quick before we start, is anybody using Lone Wolf? Do you guys use Lone Wolf, Vicky, at ABR
Yeah, I believe we do.
for your back end stuff? Okay.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. All right, guys. So we're going to jump in. So, and like I said, I'm going to monitor the participants box. So if you have something to say, please unmute yourself. Just kind of wait for me to say, "Hey, Michael, I see you're unmuted. What's your question?" And then I'll keep an eye on that. And if somebody else can monitor the chat box for me, we'll monitor the chat box. Okay, so here we go. We're going to jump right in. If you've never been in any of my classes, I tend to talk fast. So again, if you have a question, just please stop me. Okay, so as you can tell, we are not on a traditional set of escrow instructions. However, we are on the RPA, which, by the way, the RPA many, many years ago, I don't remember, maybe Vicky or some of our experienced agents can remind us when the RPA added the words "and joint escrow instructions." I'm thinking that's 20 years ago, in that neighborhood. So what the heck, maybe it's not completely crazy to do a life of the escrow class based upon the RPA. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm just going to shotgun this thing. Please stop me if, number one, if you think I've gone a little astray, or if God forbid you say something that you disagree with, or God forbid I say something that maybe is, because we have different companies' policies here. So I'm going to speak as Lance at Coldwell Banker Town and Country. So if the Coastal Alliance or Associated Brokerage has a different thought, oh no, we don't do it that way, please interrupt me. I don't want to have any misunderstandings after the fact that I've given you a different policy. And I would imagine some offices may do things a little bit differently. So we're going to jump in. Okay, so I'm on the RPA. So I'm just going to go through these pages and we're going to chat. And I'm going to give you, by the way, for those of you guys who don't know me, yes, I'm the broker. I've been doing this forever, but I'm an agent. I sold for years and my team still sells. I know this contract inside and out. I have seen thousands, tens of thousands of poorly written offers. I have seen escrows close on time, and I have seen escrows not close on time. I think I've seen it all, right? So every story that we're going to go through today is not just some hypothetical, I heard this in a training class. Everything that I'm going to relate you to is real life experience that I have personally experienced in my 34 years of doing this, and what I feel is best practice. Okay. And that you're going to hear me say a lot. I believe this is best practice. Doesn't mean it's the only way to do something, doesn't mean there's not another way, or quite honestly, God forbid, today I learned something and somebody says, wait a minute, Lance, have you thought of this? And I may change what I think is best practice based upon some input that I get from you folks today. So again, we're going to go ahead and jump in. So we've got our RPA. So let's just go through line by line and see what might be of important to a life of an escrow. So with that in mind, buyers and sellers. And by the way, this is going to look a little bit like a contract class, although I'm not going to try to get too deep into the woods on contract class. But has anybody ever written a contract with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, opened up escrow, only to have found that the escrow company subsequently comes to them and say, I'm sorry, but your buyer's name is not Mr. and Mrs. Smith. He's a junior, or there's a middle initial here, or their legal name has something else associated with it. This happens also a lot on corporations when you are writing an offer for a corporate entity, ABC investments. All right. Well, is it ABC investments, or is it A period, B period, C period, investments, comma, INC incorporated? Those things make a difference. So again, I'm going to try to tie everything back to the life of an escrow. And by the way, I'm going to suggest we have one goal in the life of the escrow, and that is to close that escrow on time. All right. So a lot of what I'm going to be emphasizing today is what I think is going to help you open and close your escrow on time with as minimal headaches and heartburn as possible from the perspective of an agent and a broker. So number one, know your client's name. And I know that sounds elementary, but you need to know your name. Are you a junior? Are you a senior? Do you use your middle initial? Do you want to use your middle initial? They don't have to have a middle initial when they take title. Do they want to spell their name out? Are they a corporate entity? What is that corporate entity? So make sure you know the name of your client, as basic as that sounds. Make sure you know the name. And by the way, this is also true of the seller. Know their name, get their legal name, and it will save you countless hours of having to go back subsequently and change it because you didn't put in a junior or a senior or whatever it happens to be. Obviously, we could probably say the same thing about the property address. Price is price. The next one I want to focus on is the close of escrow date. And again, I'd love to get some feedback. So if anybody wants to unmute themselves, and this would be helpful on the unmute, not necessarily on the chat box. Who has a preference? Is your preference to close of escrow shall occur on a specific date? Or do you prefer close of escrow shall occur on 45 days after acceptance? And there's arguments for both. I have a preference. Anybody want to chime in on what they feel might be better? I'll give you 2 seconds. Seeing none. Okay, so this is the deal. I personally think it is always best to have a hard date. Okay, so I would be the agent that would sit back and say, I think we're going to close escrow on, in consultation with my lender. I turn to my lender and say, okay, Mr. ABC Mortgage, I think everybody here is using points, so hopefully that's still the case. So let's leave names out just in case I get myself in trouble. So I'm using Joe at Joe's Mortgage, and I want to find out when I can close this escrow. Give me a date that actually works. So let's just, for example, they say it's going to be 30 days. Okay, well, I go to 30 days from now, I look at my November. Let's look at a different calendar. So here's a calendar that's maybe a little bit more visible for the group. And today is the 20th, and I go out to November 20th, and I sit back and say, okay, well, November 20th is a Friday, and I like closing escrows on Friday. That sounds great. Who likes closing escrows on Fridays? I don't. Let me rephrase that. Nothing wrong with closing an escrow on Friday. I never, ever schedule an escrow to close on Friday in the original contract. I don't think that that's best practice, because if you have a problem, which by the way, what happens when you say we're going to close 30 days And that 30, and by the way, I understand 30 days from acceptance, it gives us a little bit more wiggle room because we understand our contracts aren't getting accepted on the same day they're written. Sometimes they get accepted the next day, sometimes they get accepted 2 weeks later, which, by the way, does that create a problem for my hard date? It absolutely creates a problem for putting in a hard date. So to go back to my example over here, if I put in a hard date and say we're going to close on November 20th, because my lender said we could close in 30 days. Well, what happens if my contract actually doesn't get accepted? And now I have to go back, I have to deal with that in some form of a counteroffer. Whereas if I put in 30 days from acceptance, okay, well, now my clock starts ticking at a different date. And I understand that. Number one, we got to pay attention. All right. But I prefer to put in a date. Anybody want to give me a suggestion why I don't like to have a contract date close on a Friday? Or a Monday for that matter? Well, if its contract says Friday, people are scheduling things on Friday, moving trucks, blah, 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 blah. And what happens if we don't close? Okay. Well, our next possible earliest close of escrow date, if everything else goes good, is Monday. Now I'm dealing with buyers who have moving trucks and sellers who have moving trucks, and I'm dealing with disappointed people. So you're going to hear me say this probably multiple times throughout the next hour, is let's not set ourselves up to fail. Okay. So one of those things in the life of an escrow, and by the way, let me suggest this as well. When we have an escrow contractual close of escrow date, and that date is, let's just use this example, November 20th, because we went with the first option in the RPA, not the second option. And we went in here and we clicked on here and we went to November 20th. That is a contractual date, right? That is a contractual, that is not, it drives me crazy. I'll talk to a buyer's agent, a listing agent, a lender, and I'm like, hey, we're ready to close, or our contract says, or escrow says we're closing November 20th. And yeah, we're shooting for it. Yep.
Or it's a target date.
That's a target date. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, target date. Beautiful. No, it's not a target date. Okay. And shooting for it doesn't sound good to me. It is the date we're scheduled to close. People's lives are being planned around that date. So again, I generally don't suggest, so whenever you guys are writing contracts and hoping to close your escrow on time, I would suggest you never contractually set anything up to close on Friday. Okay. I also would suggest you never contractually set anything to close up on Monday. I also would suggest you also, oops, let me go back. My calendar got a little messed up. Anybody see a problem on the calendar here? Do we have a holiday? And by the way, this is my calendar, so I apologize. You're seeing a whole bunch of nonsense on there. But we have Thanksgiving coming up on November 26th. All right. What generally happens the 3 days before Thanksgiving? The 23rd, the 24th, the 25th, the 26th is obviously the holiday, and the 27th. What happens on those days, guys? People check out. Okay. People check out. Lenders check out. We don't check out, of course, because we're working 24/7 and we work through every holiday and we work on every day leading up to the holiday and we work on every day after the holiday. But you got to remember, we're not everybody. Okay. Buyers, sellers have vacations. Escrow officers have vacation. Oh, Lance, yeah, but I have my desk covered by Sally. I don't care. I don't want Sally covering my desk. I want you covering my desk. Lenders, underwriters, appraisers, people who draw loan documents, all of those sort of things. So right off the bat, if I was putting an escrow together today, not only would I not make my close of escrow day on Friday, the 20th, I actually would not schedule my escrow to close the following week at all. I would never schedule an escrow to close on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday before Thanksgiving. It again, can it be done? Of course it can be done. All right. But I believe you're setting yourself up for failure. Now, in the event everybody is saying, well, yeah, Lance, we understand that, but we want to get this thing closed before Thanksgiving, that's fine. Then I want you to look your client in the eyes, buyer, seller, doesn't matter who it is. By the way, it's the same conversation. I'm going to come to this from the approach of we're writing a contract with the buyer. But if I was presented with an offer on one of my listings and I had a close of escrow date on Friday the 20th, I would have a long conversation with my seller that says, all right, this is what they think they can do. I've spoken to the lender. This looks like it's good. But I would ask my seller the basic question. Hey, what happens to you if we don't close on the 20th? And what does that mean to you and your family and your life? Okay. And I would also remind them that that's the Friday before the week of Thanksgiving. Now, if the seller is like, it's okay, I'm flexible, it doesn't matter, blah, 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 then I would say, okay, look me in the eyes and let's remember this conversation, because if this doesn't close, we need to be prepared. So getting back to the basic concept here is,
Lance, one other thing I don't do, and I tell my agents, not the end of the month either. You know,
correct.
the last day or two before the end of the month,
Yep.
it generally isn't going to happen with, they're all trying to close.
Lenders get slammed. Absolutely. Those are generally, again, best practices. And again, in the context of escrow, our goal is to close our escrow on time. All right. On time. So scheduling things on Friday. And honestly, I don't even like scheduling things on Thursday. And just to put this in context, the conversation that I'm having with you, I'm going to keep it real today. Okay. Is frankly the exact same conversation I would have with my buyer and seller. You know, I'm keeping it real. Let's schedule our escrow to close on Tuesday or Wednesday. Now, a lot of people are like, the middle of the week, well, that's not convenient, because if we close on Tuesday or Wednesday and the seller has time, we want the weekend to move. And those are all legitimate reasons. And I acknowledge those reasons and we give them the thumbs up. But we also want to sit back and say, okay, the reason I like Tuesday, Wednesday, assuming that works with everybody's schedule, is if we have a problem, we can hopefully solve that last minute funding delay, solve that last minute recording that got pulled, and we still can get that thing closed on Thursday or Friday, and we can still salvage everybody's moving plans for the weekends. Keeping in mind, not an exact science. Holidays, be very, very well aware of holidays. Vicky's 100% correct. Trying to close escrows the last day or week of the month is always trouble. I tell my agents all the time, I said, hey, we've got Christmas coming up, Christmas holiday, whether you celebrate it or not, doesn't matter. People celebrate it. I personally don't like scheduling anything to close from the week of the 22nd, the 21st, all the way through the New Year's holiday. Okay. Now, again, do we close escrows the week before Christmas? And do we close escrows the week between Christmas and New Year's? Of course we do. But I generally don't like to schedule them there. And I sure as heck, if we do schedule them there, I have the conversation with my client that says, hey, this is a tough period to get escrows closed. And by the way, and again, let's take our escrow, let's put our escrow in the context of a 1031 tax deferred exchange. And it is absolutely critical, or maybe it's not even a 1031, but for whatever reason to your seller, it is critical that this escrow close by year end. Okay. You better have those concerns in mind and make sure that everybody's doing their job. And if you have an escrow that your seller, or buyer for that matter, but generally this is a seller issue. If you have a seller that says it is critical, Lance, this escrow close before December 31st for tax purposes, everybody has to be on board, guys. That is a 911. That file is flagged, and every day we got to take a look at that. And we got to make sure we understand, number one, that's the goal. And number two, is there going to be any hiccup that's going to harm that or prevent that from happening? And if that hiccup is a possibility, then you need to have those conversations with your seller today, not 3 days before close of escrow. All of those options need to be reviewed with, and again, I'm using the seller in this example, but with the client, and lay it out. Well, what happens if we don't close? Are you prepared to close this escrow in the event it closes in January? What happens? Are you still a seller if this thing doesn't close in December? Because some sellers might say no. Some sellers may say, hey, I'm not a seller. And by the way, who else needs to know that? The buyer and the buyer's agent and everybody in that transaction needs to know. If we're open an escrow today with the December 15th close of escrow date, and it's the 15th, there are no extensions into January. There are none. Otherwise, this deal is dead. Okay, I think we've whipped that horse. So point I'm trying to make on this one is simply know your escrow date, I personally prefer, I think best practice is to put in a hard date. For those of you that are like, don't like that, that's fine. So if you come over here and you check the box and you do 30 days after acceptance, just know that number one, you need to deal with that date. You need to deal with that date, especially if sometimes contracts aren't getting reviewed or counteroffers are going back and forth for a week or longer. So if that's the case, when that final counter to the counter to the counter is being executed, you've looked at the other agent in the eyeball and you've said, hey, Vic, by the way, we've taken 10 days to negotiate this. It looks like we finally have gotten to where we need to be. Let's make sure we've covered our 30-day escrow period. Okay. And if for no other reasons, agents don't always count the same. Escrow officers don't count the same. We just put 30 days in. I start counting. Next thing you know, they started counting tomorrow. I started counting today. The buyer counted 2 days ago when the offer was written. And now nobody knows or nobody expects the same escrow date. So just be careful with that. Okay, so where else have we got here on our page one of our contract that's going to potentially impact our sellers and our buyers and our escrows closing on time? You guys are going to get your disclosures. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Agency confirmation, that's going to be done. Financing terms, get buyers deposits, get them into escrow. I don't know if you guys have hardcore policies about, the default. Of course, we understand the default. Okay, so let's make sure we're clear with this. The default in the contract is we're going with 3A1. All right, buyer's deposit, buyer shall deliver, not agent, buyer shall deliver deposit by personal check unless stated otherwise. The personal check to the agent submitting the offer made payable to escrow within 3 days after acceptance. So we're not necessarily grabbing the check our time of the writing the offer. We now have the check. We've got 3 days in the life of the escrow. Who is monitoring the 3-day deposit into escrow? Or who's that agent out there that says we're 2 weeks before we're going to close or 2 days before we're going to close, and we now realize we don't have the buyer's earnest money? Anybody doing that? Okay, well, number one, that's not best practice, to say the least. So in the life of an escrow, and by the way, I'd love to sit back and say we can count on our escrow officer, because our escrow officer is a rock star and she always notifies me, hey, Lance, we've got the earnest money deposit. Here's a copy of the receipt from the buyer and it came in on day 2. That's great. Or the reverse, hey, it's day 3. We don't have the EMD. We have communication going back and forth. But maybe you're in an escrow with an escrow officer that's new to you and you're not familiar with it. And maybe that's not their best practice and you forget. All right. So I can't believe I'm, however many minutes I am into this presentation, and I haven't mentioned my contact management program, or you guys need to have some sort of a system that's going to remind you what the life of your escrow is. And not, we already talked about close of escrow date. A big one is simple, but big. Do we have the buyer's earnest money deposit? And then again, what are you going to do if you don't have it? Are you one of those agents, which by the way, I don't know a lot of these agents, but are you one of those agents that best practice for you is you're sending out notice to performs all day, making the phone call, sending out the form, making the email. Hey, I just sent you a notice to perform, Vicky. We don't have your EMD. Where is it? I would suggest that you should default as one of those agents. The default should be, I'm constantly sending out notices to perform to keep everybody on point, because again, our goal is to close our escrow on time. So let's make sure we get the EMD in time, and that needs to be on your checklist. It is, and again, we could split hairs. Well, whose responsibility is it to make sure that we got the EMD into escrow? That's escrow's responsibility, and they didn't tell me it didn't come in or it came in late. Therefore, I'm mad at escrow. Okay, you talk to your escrow company about that, but in my world, it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to make sure that EMD is in escrow in a timely fashion so that your escrow can move forward. Increased deposits are great. Cash escrows are great. I will tell you though, on cash deals, I always have conversations with my cash transactions because generally those transactions are shorter. We have a 10-day escrow. We want to close on time. How many times are you guys having cash transactions where at the last minute they say, well, I want to do a hard money loan. Okay, I'm going to switch it to hard money. Okay, As a listing agent or as a seller, the pit in your stomach automatically just, oh, what did I thought we had a cash deal. You sent me proof of funds that say I have a cash deal. Now you want to change it. So representing a buyer, again, cash deal, short escrow window, you need to have the conversation. Is this really cash? I see you've given me a proof of funds that has plenty of cash in it. I just want to make sure that this is truly the cash that you plan on using to close this transaction. Because if you're going to switch this over to a hard money loan, chances are we're not going to close in a timely fashion. Again, talk to your lenders about closing on time. You never, ever, ever can write a purchase contract, in my opinion, without having a full blessing of the lender doing the loan for the buyer and them signing off on everything. And in this context, particularly closing dates. I like to use per diems. I don't know if anybody here on the call uses per diems on a regular basis, but I've used a per diem for years. Basically, hey, our close of escrow date is this particular date. If the escrow doesn't close, and for any reason that's not the fault of the seller, I'm using this in the context of a listing agent, the buyer agrees to pay $100 per diem from the date of close of escrow forward. Okay. That used to be unusual. Now they're fairly common. I like them. I like them a lot, but I use the per diem in a little different. If I'm representing the buyer, I basically turn, whether this listing agent's asking for a per diem or not, if I'm representing the buyer, I have the per diem conversation with the lender. And I sit back and say, okay, assuming the buyer is giving you everything they need, and you've indicated that we can close escrow on this date and time, are you, the lender, prepared to pay the per diem in the event the escrow doesn't close on time? Okay. Basically, if you can't fund the loan and get it wrapped up in time. If the lender hesitates at all, which is okay, but if the lender hesitates at all, then in my opinion, you need to have a different conversation, and not a conversation of maybe I need a new lender, but the conversation needs to be, okay, you don't appear to be as confident getting this escrow closed in 30 days and willing to pay a per diem for those extra 5 days. Are you confident to the point that you would be willing to pay the per diem if we did it for 35 days, for 40 days, for 45 days? And then I find what that comfort level is with that lender. So, and I'd like to have that in the very, very beginning of the conversation. And I want to find whatever that date is from the lender perspective that, and again, we're not asking them to pay the per diem. We're just saying, if buyer gives you everything they need, at what point are you 100% confident that you can close this thing on time and you'll never have to pay a per diem? And I don't care how good your lender is or how long you've done business with them. Generally speaking, if they kind of give you, oh yeah, this is an easy file and we can close it in 30 days, even those lenders tend to sit back and say, well, okay, but wait, a minute. What if you were responsible to pay $100 per diem on day 31? Even those lenders say, well, you know what, how about give me 40? Okay, give me 40. All right. So then again, 40 days is so that being said, then I would extend my escrow period. I would sit back and say, I would like a longer escrow period. But again, I love the per diems. Okay, I'm going to skip over the loan stuff. We'll kind of come back to some loan stuff in another fashion. However, I'll just throw a couple of examples under additional financing terms, which again can cause delays in your escrows. You guys understand, you write a contract and the contract ends up going to the lender, and the lender in theory reads it, right? The lender in theory reads and says, oh, the buyer and the seller have agreed that the seller will pay $10,000 of buyer's closing costs and recurrings and non-recurrings and all the rest of that. Okay. Well, let me assure you, they do read that, but they don't always read it on the day you open the contract or the day and by the way, don't always assume that your loan officer is as smart or knows what the underwriter knows, because what happens far too many times is we just think, oh yeah, sure, the seller agreed to pay $10,000, no big deal. Now I'm in underwriting, I'm whatever period of time, a week before close of escrow, and somebody that I've never heard of before lets me know that, oh, on this particular loan package, the buyer's only allowed to receive a X amount of credit from the seller. And by the way, you asked for $2,000 more than the seller could even contribute. All right. Those are problems that should not be being dealt with at a later date. Those need to be dealt with on the day you're writing the contract. Okay. The lender needs to tell you, yes, on this particular loan product, it's perfectly okay for the seller to give a $10,000 credit to the buyer, and I want to get that dealt with up front. Okay. In the context of closing our escrow on time, my suggestion, do not negotiate repairs of any kind. If you can avoid negotiating, oh, seller agrees to put on a new roof, okay, you might as well just say, I agree to shoot myself in the head before close of escrow. Okay, nothing good can come from that, and you're more than likely going to be looking at some sort of a delay. I think best practice is always negotiate price. Okay, if the sellers, well, yeah, or the buyers, yeah, but the carpet's atrocious. Yeah, it is atrocious, but with this particular financing, it's not going to be an issue for the appraiser. It's not going to be an issue for the lender. And yes, you're right. It's going to cost a little bit of money to get this carpet replaced, but let's negotiate price. So let's build into our offer what it would cost you to get that carpet replaced. And I understand that creates problems for some buyers. Some buyers, well, yeah, but I don't have the extra money and I kind of need to get this done. I get all that. I'm talking perfect world. Okay. I'm talking perfect world, but try to avoid those type of negotiations, and quite honestly, unless the buyer actually needs closing costs, I recommend, and I mean absolutely needs closing costs, I recommend you leave the closing cost out as well. And again, we're trying to get to a smooth, clean close of escrow with as little delays as possible. Verification down payment. Again, this is real estate 101. And by the way, does escrow care about any of this? No. Escrow generally doesn't care about any VODs or any of that sort of stuff. All right. I want my escrow to close on time. And by the way, I'm not having my seller sign a contract. And quite honestly, I'm not writing a contract for a buyer unless I've got a verification of down payment costs. I want to see the money, even if it's just something off of their phone, a screenshot from their investment account or from their bank account that says, hey, I have the money. All right. Same thing with appraisals. Are we getting appraisals done in a timely fashion these days? Are we getting appraisals done in 17 days? All right. Well, let's just pretend we're in a world that things are not what they are necessarily today. And it's always a conversation that you want to have with your lender. Always a conversation. Can I get this appraisal done? And more importantly, am I going to be in a position to close my escrow in time and get this appraisal contingency removed within 17 days? Same thing with application, same thing with loan contingencies. We've got the loan contingencies basically built in that says, hey, obviously, of course, the loan contingency, the default now is 21 days. Can you get this loan done in 21 days? Far too often, I'll share some dirty laundry with you guys. What happens in my office? I'll have an agent will call me and say, hey, we're supposed to close escrow, or we're having a problem. This is the problem. I can't get this. I can't get that. And the very, very first thing that I ask them is, are you in contract? Meaning, are you in contract? Meaning the escrow date is in the future. We're supposed to close on Friday and today is Tuesday. Or are you out of contract? Meaning that you were supposed to close 2 weeks ago and there's been no addendum or anything like that done. You haven't extended the escrow. You have not done an extension of time addendum. And by the way, I'm going to make some assumptions. You guys realize when we amend the contract, we also have to amend the escrow. They're two separate amendments, right? We got an addendum that says we're changing the price, and then we have an amendment for escrow that says that we're changing the price. Okay, that's again real estate 101. But getting back to and I'm going to use the loan contingency in regard to all of the contingencies. Agent calls me, I have a problem. When are you supposed to close? I'm supposed to close in 3 days. Okay, great. So you've been in contract for 45 days. Great. Let's see if we can fix this problem and still get you to close escrow on Friday. So depending upon who they're representing, it really doesn't matter. Has the buyer removed contingencies? No. Oh, okay. Your buyer, you are on day 42 of a 45-day escrow. You're the listing agent, and your seller wants to confirm that escrow is going to close on Friday, this Friday, 3 days from now. And I ask you if the buyer and their agent on the other side has removed contingencies, and the answer is no. Wow, you talk about the life of an escrow having a problem, right? This gets back to my comment earlier about using the proper notices to perform. Okay, if you have a contingency, whether it's an inspection contingency, an appraisal contingency, a loan contingency, in my eyes, you need to have something in your system, whatever that is, not counting on escrow. And by the way, do we count on escrow? Yes, of course we do. We count on them all, frankly, sometimes too much. but you need to have something in your system that says, and I'll just use Vicky. Hey, Vicky, Vicky's the buyer's agent. I'm the listing agent. Inspection contingency is coming up in a few days. How we doing? Okay. Are we going to make it? I want her to know I'm expecting a removal of the inspection contingency on day 17. And if I'm not going to get it, I at least want to know why. Same thing with, of course, loan contingencies and whatever other contingency you may have. Because getting back to our life of an escrow, you can't expect, in my opinion, you cannot expect to close escrow on time if you haven't done other things on time within the life of that escrow. Putting earnest money deposits in, that's kind of an easy one, and that's early. Nobody gets too hung up on that. Oh, it came in a few days late, no big deal. Loan contingencies, appraisal contingencies. And now we're starting, I don't know if you guys are seeing this a lot, but we're starting to see appraisals coming a little bit low. So got to deal with those. You got to deal with them quickly. This is kind of a sidebar, and I apologize if I'm kind of scattered all over the map here. But this has happened in my office. Agent calls me with the problem, which, by the way, happy resolution. Everything turned out fine. But they had an appraisal problem. Over a period of about 5 days, which is not unusual, buyer and agent, listing agent are going back and forth and have resolved the appraisal problem. Okay. Everyone's agreed on price. However, during that 5 days, 4 or 5 other issues were in debate. Some repairs, extension of an escrow, a variety of things. Well, once they finally agreed on price, they had forgot to memorialize all of these other things. Okay. Which meant, of course, we had a problem. So they thought they had an agreement, and then they were just having a dispute over, wait, yeah, but we thought the seller was going to do repairs. Well, they were going to do repairs at the contract price. Now we're at a lower price, repairs are out the window. It was discussed. Buyer's agent had one opinion or one memory of what was said during that 4-day negotiation. Listing agent had a little bit different memory. We never committed to do the repairs at the new price. So then we spend 4 more days going back and forth over that. Those escrows generally don't close on time. And by the way, all of that can be avoided just as a general rule. And of course, we don't like agreements and escrows that have amendment and amendment and amendment. I mean, if you close escrow and you've got a file that has 4 different amendments in it, I would suggest that somewhere along the line, things went a little sideways, but it happens. But if you are in that situation, I would suggest you memorialize those changes immediately. Okay. So if in the process of negotiating a repair request, or excuse me, a low appraisal, and Vic and I have agreed on repairs, I'm memorializing that. Maybe it's not in an amendment right away, but at least it's an email. Hey, Vicki, I know we're still working on the price, but based upon our conversation today, I just want to clarify that your buyer has agreed that the seller will no longer do repairs. Okay. And memorialize that, and then ultimately get those into addendums as quickly as you can. So the general rule on contingency removals, you want your escrow to close on time, comply with what the contract says. Now, if you're a listing agent, then you hammer on them because that's your duty. One of you might make an argument that says, well, Lance, as the buyer's agent, I don't remove contingencies unless my seller or the listing agent is kind of on me. I want to leave that open because nobody's putting pressure on me. I totally understand that argument. Gives your buyer a lot of flexibility. Not only does it give them a lot of flexibility, it gives them an out to basically say, I'm out. You get to the end. By the way, I don't know if this happens in your office. It happens in my office occasionally, and it kills me. We are on day 45 of a 45-day escrow. It's clear that this escrow is not going to close. The seller is upset. Seller is expecting buyer's EMD, and the buyer has done everything wrong. Okay, hasn't complied with anything. And in this particular example, which I've given you no details, let's just agree that the buyer's EMD should be given to the seller. But guess what? Buyer's never released a contingency, and the listing agent has never asked for a contingency release. That's a tough one. As a listing agent, that's a tough one to go back to your seller and say, oh, I'm really sorry, we're going to have a problem claiming that EMD because the buyer never removed contingencies. Because then the sellers go back and start reading the agreement. They start reading the agreement and they say, well, wait a minute, they should have removed that contingency on day 21 and we're on day 44. And how come that didn't happen? Well, it didn't happen, quite honestly, because we didn't do our job. Okay, we talked a minute ago about lender credits. There's the paragraph in the contract that specifically talks about what happens if there's a lender credit. Know that contract, know that specifically. I'm not going to read it to you, but read that. If you've never read that, you better read that, because there's some language in there that obligates your buyer and seller to certain things if you make a mistake on a lender credit. Buyer stated financing. Buyers technically shouldn't just be changing financing. I'm going to go from cash to a hard money loan, or I'm going to go from a 25% down payment to FHA. Okay. Seller is relying on that. These things cause delays in escrows, and sellers don't have to necessarily accept that. Oh, yeah, but it's still going to close on time. I accepted Vicky's offer because Vicky said she was going to basically put down a 30% down payment. If I had known you weren't, I would have accepted Betty Sandoval's offer. Okay. Right? Because I didn't want to take the chance of an FHA appraisal with FHA conditions, whatever it happens to be. Get your addendum straight. Let's take a look at these addendums here for a second. I'm going to skip over some harder ones. Septic, okay? Has anybody ever listed a property or sold a property that has septic and you didn't know it? Oops, you found out at the last minute. Or even worse, you're under contract, you do know there's a septic. Buyer and seller have agreed that the septic will be certified and pumped, and basically they'll get a certificate of certification that the septic is in working order, and you forget to order it. And by the way, you can say the exact same thing about a termite report or a roof inspection or any other inspections. Okay. So again, you want your escrow to close on time. You must have, and some of you may be saying, Lance, come on, man, really? Okay. It hasn't happened to me in a while, but yeah, 25 years ago was in escrow. I thought I knew what I was doing. And my seller had agreed to pay for a termite report and clearance. And we had it all covered contractually, and we never ordered it. And I get to 2-3 days before close of escrow, loan docs are coming in. What does escrow do? Escrow calls you and says, hey, Lance, we need this, we need the septic, we need the termite, we need those things that you agreed to do in the contract. And I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to do that. Seems basic, but you can apply that scenario to a whole bunch of different things. We don't even have to get into, court confirmations or probates or REO stuff and all the rest of that sort of stuff. But there's all sorts of things that we need to make sure that we have a little checklist. Do not count on your escrow officer to make sure that you're remembering to order whatever those inspections are. Again, this is more of a contract thing, but under inspections, I see this all the time, and I'd be curious if any of the other offices do it differently. If so, chime in. They took the termite out of the contract, right? It used to be built into the contract, and we kind of had a little bit of a safety net there. So at least we would address a termite. So let's just use the termite as our example. So in here, the buyer has asked for a termite report. Okay. What does a termite report mean? Termite reports, you ask for a termite report. Seller agreed to give you a termite report. We ordered a termite report. Cost us seller $75. Here's the termite report. Oh, yeah, it needs a fumigation. Well, you didn't ask for the clearance to go with it. All you've asked for is the report. So these little things, which to me are real estate 101, I see this happen all the time where it delays in escrow. It delays in escrow because the expectation was by the buyer's agent, which is a wrong expectation, but the buyer's agent will say, well, they asked for a report. Well, of course we expected a clearance with it. And yeah, we asked for the septic report or inspection. Well, yeah, you got the inspection. It's $450 for the inspection. Well, yeah, it needs a new leach line. That's $4,000. So make sure you get all of those details covered. All of those details are so critical. Again, silly stuff, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. I got to tell you, the appraisers today drive me nuts. By the way, if you're not a listing agent or a buyer's agent that has smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors and just a trunk load full of stuff, I would suggest you go get a trunk load full of stuff. Appraisers come out, everything looks great. There's one missing smoke detector, or the smoke detector's there, but it's the 9-volt batteries. It's an older one or whatever it happens to be. Be prepared, guys, because what do appraisers do? All right, I'll see you next week, or I'll see you in a few days because I got to sign that off. And not all of them are so nice where they'll take a picture or they'll take your word for it. So get that stuff covered. Escrow and title, cover the fees. Generally, honestly, in my experience, the escrow company itself, or for that matter, the title company itself, are very rarely, if ever, responsible for a delay in closing your escrow. Okay, that's just generally not the problem. Okay, so what do we got here? City council tax, leave that alone. HOA stuff. Okay, I see all the time, even rock star agents are completely negligent when it comes to managing their HOA documentation that needs to come in, right? We are supposed to be, sellers are supposed to be providing HOA documentation to buyers. I see buyers all the time getting HOA documents and CC&Rs at close of escrow. Well, that's not right. Hey, Vicky or somebody help me out. What's the default for the seller? What's the default for the seller to provide bylaws, CC&Rs, minutes from the prior meetings, all the
And
associated
10 civil code is 10-day
10
business.
days. Okay, so it's 10 days and it's somewhere in the contract. I think I skipped it already. Somewhere in the contract, it says that the seller shall provide the following disclosures, including everything I just mentioned, or Vicky just mentioned, to the buyer within 10 days. So the same thing is true on the buy side. So far, I've been kind of taking the listing agent's approach that you need to be kind of a pit bull and demand that the buyers are removing their contingencies, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just use the HOA as an example. Okay, you have a buyer who is concerned about all the HOA documents, and we have a 30-day escrow, and we give them the HOA documents when they're signing their loan documents on day 27. Okay, that's the first time they've seen them. Well, first of all, that's a breach of contract item. Seller should have given them within 10 days. The buyer's agent in that case never sent a notice to perform to the listing agent and says, hey, we don't have the HOA documents. We're having a problem here. Okay. You will, if you do this business long enough, that will be one of those things that will cause your escrow to delay. A buyer will sit back and say, well, I just got the or worse, it'll cause your escrow to blow up. I use Moreno Valley Ranch as a great example. This happened to me. I got sued twice for the same thing. Did not learn the lesson the first time. If you sell properties in Moreno Valley Ranch, they amended their bylaws and CC&Rs that says you cannot have the first year you acquire the property, you are not allowed to rent it. Has to be an owner occupied property in the first year. Okay. Didn't used to be that way with them. They changed their governing documents to reflect that. Agents fell asleep. All right. You get into escrow, you close escrow, nobody read them. Nobody, and by the way, the buyer in that case wanted to put a tenant in there. Oops, that's a problem. Okay. These things need to get in there up front. People need to understand up front what they're getting to. And again, in this case, if it says you have 7 or 10 days to provide those documents, get them. So termite inspection, home inspection, all those inspections, HOA docs, make that stuff happen. Private transfer fees are pretty rare in our area. We don't have to worry about it too much. Get your home. I mean, something silly as a home warranty, make sure you've got the right dollar amount in there. You've got the provider. Nothing drives me. By the way, you make a lot of these mistakes. We end up paying for it. It says, oh yeah, the seller's going to pay for a home protection plan not to exceed $300 on the behalf of the buyer. I don't know what home protection plan you're going to buy today for $300. I don't even think they exist. Okay. So, make sure you've looked at those policies and you know what you're looking at. Seller to include items. Okay. I think we can blow past a little bit of this. Okay. Well, we did the final walkthrough. Okay. Let's close our escrow in time. We're doing the final walkthrough. You go into the property and the seller has removed all of the balances from the property. Okay. Our balance is a fixture? Think so. They're screwed to the wall. Well, yeah, Lance, but we took them because the balances matched our bedspread and they kind of go. Like, okay, well, first of all, the house you're buying has the exact same window with the exact same size and the exact same balance. It's a fixture. It needs to stay. It's included. We never excluded that from the property. Now, as a listing agent or a buyer's agent, and again, I know we're getting into the grass here a little bit, but these are conversations you need to have with your seller and have an understanding with the buyer. What's stain? Is that pool equipment stain? Is that brush stain? Is the wiggly creepy crawler at the bottom of the pool stain? These are things that delay escrows and cause major problems. One of the biggest things, I don't think we see this as much as we used to, but there are a lot. Well, let me rephrase that. We see it more than we used to. I don't think it's as big of a problem as it's been in the past because we're aware of it. So many of these properties now have leased systems of some sort or the other, or some sort of a liened item. Guys, that is, if I'm taking a listing or if I'm going into escrow on one of these properties, it's at the top of my list. It is at the top of my list because even if the buyer and seller are in agreement that, yeah, I'm going to assume it, we're going to take over the transfer, we understand what the costs are, these things don't always happen in 2 days. Okay. Getting the documentation from the solar company to transfer the lease on on the panels or whatever it may be, sometimes takes some time. Okay, so we're going to make sure you deal with that up front. I see agents all the time, they deal with it, and this is how they deal with it. Hey, Summer, my escrow officer, there's some leased equipment on this property. The buyer has agreed to it. Would you just take care of that? Would you reach out to the company and take care of that for me? Wow. Now, again, you have a great escrow officer and they can help you in that regard, then God bless you. Fantastic. That's great. But at the end of the day, as with everything in these deals, it's your responsibility. So you've got to make those calls, or at a minimum, you have to follow up with whoever you designated to do that. Same thing with excluded stuff from the property. We could go really deep into that. Closing and possession. Again, there was a rash. It hasn't happened in a couple of years, but for some reason, my agents in my office lost their mind for about 6 months. And my agents were either writing contracts or accepting contracts on occupied properties. These were occupied properties by the seller. And they were basically saying that delivery of the property is to be delivered to the buyer at close of escrow. Okay. Well, I don't know about you, but most sellers are not prepared to do that. They need a couple of days. They need the 3 days. They need some period of time. So just be aware of that and make sure that you've given your seller appropriate amount of time. Or again, if you're the buyer's agent, you're good. Tenants are a whole nother story. One thing that I see happen that does delay escrows all the time is you're selling investment properties. There's tenant occupied properties you're selling, and you forget, even though it says it in the contract, that security deposits will be transferred to the buyer. It says in the contract, this is the default, rents will be prorated into the contract. Guess what? For some reason, that gets past escrow. Or what I find happens far too often is the seller doesn't understand that. Maybe they understand the security deposit needs to get transferred, but they don't necessarily understand how rents get prorated. And that, wait a minute, the tenants, I have a 4-unit building and it's, I collected $7,000 in rents. And what do you mean that that we close on the 15th and $3,500 of that money needs to get back? This is being a professional. These are the type of things that, again, if handled up front, your escrows close on time. Again, disclosures, this Vicky kind of helped me out on this. The HOA stuff is in here, the statutory disclosures and the TDSs and the lead-based paints and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Be a pro, guys. Be a pro. Get those things done. Get them filled out properly. We should not be dealing with disclosures, deep into an escrow process. It's just such bad practice, guys. Get these disclosures from the seller over to the buyer ASAP, and frankly, use the notice to performs. Okay, use those on both sides to make sure that these disclosures are getting back and forth. Same thing, the natural hazard. I mean, it's been around for so long, we almost kind of forget about it. All of this stuff needs to get there. If you're selling a property in the state, we know we have the withholding issues now, right? We've got the withholding issues for state taxes for our sellers. Make sure they understand that. Make sure they understand what the California withholding law is. You do not want to be a couple days before close of escrow. The seller gets their estimated closing statement. The escrow officer has put on the estimated closing statement the California required withholding, and the seller has no idea what that is. What is this? Which, by the way, the life of the escrow is also the way I'm teaching it, could be the life of an agent. Or let's do this. Let's close our escrow on time, but let's extend our life expectancy and not cause undue stress on not only us, but our clients, because we didn't deal with it properly and we're worried because, oh crap, I forgot to tell my seller that they are subject to California withholding law. Okay. And they're not expecting that. Megan's Law, again, it's just one of those things that needs to be addressed. And again, if you have a buyer who is concerned about this stuff, by the way, if you're not going through the contract with your client in detail, this is one of those moments. If I'm representing the buyer, I sit back and I literally tell them, I'm like, hey, Vic, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I was just going to say, why don't you share what the withholding tax, what prompts that?
Well, yeah. Okay. So I'm a seller in California now. Okay. You're going to fill out the FERPTA form. Okay. And again, depending upon what they put on the FERPTA, okay, is going to depend on whether the holding tax is going to apply. Generally, it's applying to investment properties or sellers that are moving out of state. Okay. So I moved, California wants to make sure that they're getting that you're going to file your income tax And if you have any California income tax that you're just not going to skip out and not pay your income tax. So they, in the same way that we do like payroll withholding, the state says, okay, we got a pot of money over here. Let's withhold. Let's take our 3 1/3%. Let's put it over here. Probably more money than what the seller would owe. Want to make sure that seller files their income tax the following year. Okay, they sold it. And okay, great. They owed us X amount of dollars in tax. Oh, we collected a whole bunch over here. Now we can go ahead and we can refund the difference, assuming there is a refunding of the difference. But this is the FERPTA form. Okay, this is the FERPTA form, depending upon what boxes your sellers are going. By the way, sellers like to cheat on this. Goodness gracious, we want nothing to do with that. Are you kidding me? And we sure as hell don't want to be encouraging sellers to cheat on this. Bad news. Now, and again, these are tax questions, these are legal questions. So if your seller has some concerns, then of course you know where to send them. Send them to get some legal advice. I could go on for an hour on that, but you need to.
And just for the CBABR agents, our policy is we use the QS form.
Correct.
We
Correct.
don't have our sellers complete FERPTA.
Correct. And again, that's a whole nother conversation. It is an escrow issue. The qualified substitute, the QS form coming from escrow is the best practice. That is the best practice in this. It's seller's protection, social security numbers withheld, et cetera, et cetera. But QS is the way to go for sure. Okay, I'm going to move a little bit faster because I'm talking long and we're butting up on our timeline already. Again, we talked a little bit about HOA docs. Here's your condos and your PUDs. Make sure you're getting those documents in a timely fashion. Condition of property. I like to make it perfectly clear, guys. In the contract right here, boom, property is sold as is. Oops, as is in its present condition, right there. Okay, it's an as is. It's almost like an REO. Unless you've agreed to something else, this is what you're going to get. All right. There's no guarantee that the property is going to have fresh paint or blah, 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 blah. Do your inspections, deal with those up front. Buyers, again, they have to get their inspection contingencies. We live and die, of course, by the inspection contingencies here in paragraph 12. I'm gonna go a little bit faster. Title investing, we kind of sort of already chatted with that as far as making sure they have the right vesting, the right names. But I think we're doing a class tomorrow on understanding or reading a preliminary title report. It also ties into the life of an escrow. You guys all have a responsibility to read that prelim immediately. Some of you, depending upon what your relationship is with your title company, if you ask for a prelim when you take the listing, some title company, well, sure. Because by the way, you realize it's a little bit of work to do a prelim. It's not just like ordering a profile. I mean, there's some time and money associated with that. But if your title company will give you the prelim, granted, it's going to have to be updated when you open. Actually, it probably won't have to be updated because we're selling these houses so fast. But if you order a prelim at the time you take the listing, or again, if you don't get that, as soon as that prelim hits your hands after you've opened escrow, you must read it, guys. You have to read it. Yes, 90+% of the prelims are clean and there's nothing that you have to worry about. But the ones that won't, of course, will delay your escrows. So read those prelims in detail. Take your time. Again, stick to your time periods. 7 days for the seller to provide certain stuff, 17 days for the buyer to release them. Again, use your seller's right to cancel, use your notice to perform, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going a little bit faster because I don't want to hold you guys much past 1 o'clock. We've got a notice of removal of contingencies. Cancellation. By the way, we all want to save deals. Don't let anything that I'm going to say in the next 30 seconds imply that I'm not here to save a deal. Always want to save a deal, always want to work it out. Having said that, you got to know when to cancel the deal, guys. You got to know when to cancel the deal. And unfortunately, sometimes we go a little bit farther, a little bit longer into that process before we cancel. And generally, of course, now we're way past the scheduled close of escrow date. So I will tell you, if you follow the contract, read the contract and check all the boxes and the date lines, when you do get to that point, when you have a seller, for example, that says, I want to cancel the transaction for cause, your life tends to go a little bit easier. Deposits, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about deposits. Again, anybody had a buyer or an escrow that was delayed because of a final walkthrough? It happens. Number one, do your final walkthroughs early. If you can, do multiple final walkthroughs. Doing the final walkthrough the day before close of escrow, to me, is a recipe for a delay. Okay. Doing the final not doing the final walkthrough is just a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. But it says, within 5 days prior to close, sure, do it on day 5. If the seller will let you in even earlier, hey, I'm just excited and just want to make sure. But do those final walkthroughs, get them done as early as possible, and then also be a pro. Final walkthroughs are not for, oh my gosh, there's a stain on the carpet, and oh my gosh, there's a smudge on the paint, and that's not what walkthroughs are for, guys. And that's you. By the way, that's you. And by the way, I would say the same thing about home inspections. Um, Deal with repairs quickly. And by the way, if I'm the listing agent and Vicky comes to me with a repair request within the time of the home inspection, I generally attempt everything I can. Something, maybe health and safety, need to be addressed, but I generally, Vicky, I tell you what, let's do this. It's a lot easier. Put a dollar amount. Give me a dollar amount. Let's negotiate a $2,000 repair, or credit, if assuming we can do that, as opposed to these 32 items that you have on your repair request. It tends to make things go quicker. Make sure your buyers and sellers understand how things get prorated. Again, if your seller looks at the estimated final closing statement and there's anything on that estimated final closing statement that you have not already spoken with them about, shame on you. Okay? Shame on you. They should not be surprised by a withholding tax. They should not be surprised that, oh my God, I made my mortgage payment. Why do I have this interest, this prorated interest that I'm paying to my lender to pay off my loan? Well, yeah, because the mortgage payment you made on October 1st covered September. You got to pay for the 30 days or the 15 days in October. Well, you never told me that. I needed every penny, and now I have $2,000 less because we never explained to them what prorations mean. Possibly, again, we're closing escrow. So be a pro, know your job. Compensation, I don't know that we have to worry about. I'll just say, try to keep your money in your pocket. That's where it belongs. Representing capacity. If you are in a situation, and hopefully you know this sooner rather than later, where one of your clients is being represented by a trust or a trustee, or they're a corporate officer or something like that, get that early. Get that early. If I'm an investor and I buy all my properties under my corporation, and my agent turns to me and says, okay, great, let me get a copy of your articles of incorporations and your article, and your operating agreement. And I'm like, blah, 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 blah. Well, then guess what? I'm not a real investor, and I'm not buying properties under my corporation, because those people know that. They know that immediately escrow and title is going to need a copy of their articles, and they're going to need their operating agreement, and they're going to need, because the operating agreement generally says who has the capacity to actually sign for the corporation. These are all things that need to happen early, very, very early in the process. Okay, those are escrow instructions, remedies for breach. This is liquidated damages. I mean, if you're getting that, we're not closing on time. I don't think we need to go through mediation arbitration too much. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is my advice to you guys. And again, this might not have been exactly what you had expected when you saw life of the escrow. You expected an escrow officer to kind of go through, and we do this, and we do this, and we do this, and this is how it works, and this is what you can share with your client. So I guess my take on this afternoon was, be smart the way you write your offers. Prepare for those problems. It's for your own mental health, guys. I mean, it really is. Something as simple as not scheduling escrows to close the Monday, Tuesday before Thanksgiving. You don't want to ruin your Thanksgiving holiday or your client's Thanksgiving holiday, because if you had just dealt with that issue 30 days sooner, escrow closes when we should have expected it to, and then you get to enjoy your time. Okay, I could go on. It looks like it's a couple minutes after 1. If there are any questions, Teresa, you got, and by the way, if you guys need to bug out, that's fine. Otherwise, I have all the time in the world. I can answer as many questions as we got. Teresa, go ahead.
Yeah, hey Lance, I just want to mention a couple things. Down here, I'm at CBABR Marietta. We have Lennar homes that are just building like crazy, and they have a private transfer tax in their tracks that goes every single time Lennar home sells in Infinity. This
really
has to be paid private transfer.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I don't know, if I lived in one, I'd get a class action lawsuit going or something. But anyway, so I advise my client, my agents, on that allocation of costs to mark seller on private transfer tax, and then just put if applicable.
Yep.
So that if it is a Lennar home built and that comes up somewhere in the deal, it always is a crazy who's going to pay it. So if it comes,
I said in the beginning that, hopefully I could learn something as well. So here we have the very first question with some feedback or comment. I did not know that, Teresa.
Yeah,
I was unaware that anybody around here locally was building properties and charging private transfer tax. This is a longer conversation. If you're exactly familiar with what Teresa is talking about, you need to go talk to your broker, talk to your manager. This is a big deal. This is
Yeah.
a big deal.
And I have another big deal, back to the earnest money deposit.
Yep.
When DRE are auditing brokers' files now, they're specifically looking at one of the items is the earnest money deposit. And if that receipt isn't 3 days, like it's supposed to from acceptance,
That's right.
the brokers. So if your buyer did not get it into escrow in 3 days, you need to do an extension of time addendum and extend that part of the thing and extend 6 days, 7 days, whatever it took them to get it in there.
And that's not new. Our company's been audited multiple times, and that's
Yeah.
always on the checklist. And it
Oh,
seems
yeah.
like a silly thing. Oh, what's the big deal, Lance? It got there on
Right.
day 4. Or what's the big deal? It got there on day 5, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay, yeah, sure. And nobody cared. It was fine. Well, nobody cares until the auditor comes in,
Right.
and the brokers start getting little pieces of their fingers chopped off. So
Yeah.
all of those things. And by the way, that's so true with everything about this. So again, I don't see anybody else unmuted. So unless there's another one, I'll close with the following.
I have something, Lance.
Go ahead, Vic.
Too. Yeah, and Teresa's correct. That actually started in about 2008. The Lennar started slapping them on, and CAR took a position on that, the private transfer tax. But the other thing I want to talk about is texting,
Yep.
because we're seeing more and more of that. And CAR had a case where most of the deal was done by text. There was no communication log in the file and not really much email. So you really are required, if you're doing texting, you can do it, but then you need to do an email that says, per our text, blah, 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 for the communication log in your files, or you can screenshot the text and email it to yourself for the file. And I believe there's apps that could also transfer it into email or Word document. So texting is huge, but you've got to make sure you capture that conversation.
Yeah, huge, huge, huge. Because let's face it, a significant percentage of our dialogue in a transaction now is, whether it's with the buyer, seller, other agent, escrow, lender, whoever it may be, we do so much via text, right? I mean, it's huge. And then again, that's not new. We need to memorialize that. All of whatever application you're using, and by the way, it's so difficult to just take screenshots and get all that in. But if that's what you're doing and you're capturing the entire conversation, that's important. So I don't see anybody else. So I'm going to close with the following. Okay. And again, for those of you that have done this for a while, this is, I'm not going to give you an epiphany here. This is the deal. It's not important until it is. All right. There are so many items in this, in every if we were to go through an audit, and I don't mean DRE audit, I just mean go through and audit a file in any one of our offices. The sad truth is we probably could find minor oversights in almost every, which closed successfully, and the buyers were happy and the sellers were happy, and we got paid, and there's no problem with that file, and everybody ended happy. But if you really went in and looked at it, we didn't get a contingency removed in a timely fashion. We didn't send a notice to perform. We didn't get a verification, whatever, insert whatever the example is here. And guess what? It closed. Everyone was happy. No big deal. It's not a big deal until it is. All right. And what I mean by that is when that deal goes south, and again, I'm not even talking about an auditor, a buyer wants to cancel, the seller wants to cancel, somebody wants to hold someone's feet to the fire. Then you go in and realize that there was an oversight, or frankly, just, a lack of attention. That's when things can get ugly. So cross your T's, dot your I's, close your escrows on time, and go sell something, guys. So, and I hope you got some value out of that. I don't think it's exactly what you expected when you saw the headline of today's class. But all right, peace and love, guys. We'll catch you later. Bye-bye. We'll see you.
Bye, Lance.
Bye-bye.